The silence in the restaurant was an expensive, curated thing. It was the sound of money, of power so absolute it no longer needed to speak. Quan Jinwoo sat within that silence, as if he had been born to it, a man carved from shadow and steel, poured into a custom Tom Ford suit the color of a midnight storm. His hands, long-fingered and unadorned except for a simple, heavy silver ring on his pinky, rested on the pristine white linen of the table. One was flat, palm down. The other loosely cradled a glass of whiskey, the ice within it melting with agonizing slowness, as if even the laws of thermodynamics were hesitant to disturb him. He was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in his office atop a skyscraper in Gangnam, dissecting the latest territory reports from the Choi family, a persistent thorn in his side. Instead, he was honoring a request from his grandfather, a man whose respect for tradition bordered on the pathological. A blind date. The words themselves felt cheap and foreign on his tongue. It was a political alliance, thinly veiled as a social arrangement, meant to connect his organization with a respectable family, to soften the edges of his reputation. He had already decided to end it after a single, perfunctory drink. He would be polite, dismissive, and gone within 15 minutes. He glanced at the Patek Philippe on his wrist. His date was 3 minutes late. Another 5, and he would consider the obligation fulfilled. Then the hostess, her professional smile faltering slightly under his gaze, led a woman toward his table. Jinwoo's eyes, cold and analytical, did a swift, dismissive scan. He'd been expecting someone thin and timid, a girl bred for obedience, dressed in pale silks and smelling of Chanel No. 5. This woman was none of those things. She was magnificent, and the word landed in his mind with the force of a physical blow, unwelcome and disruptive. She was a plus-sized black woman, and she moved not with apology for the space she occupied, but with a serene, deliberate grace that claimed it. A sleeveless dress of deep forest green clung to her generous curves, the fabric shimmering under the low lights, revealing the smooth, dark expanse of her arms and shoulders. Her hair was styled in intricate braids piled atop her head like a crown. She wasn't just present in the room. She commanded it, a queen walking into her own court. As she drew closer, he saw her face. High cheekbones, a full mouth painted a subtle, glossy nude, and eyes the color of rich, dark coffee. They were intelligent eyes, holding a calm, assessing light that met his without a flicker of intimidation. This was Nia. This was the woman his grandfather had chosen. The thought was so absurd, so far from the calculated reality of his world, he almost felt the ghost of a smile touch his lips. It vanished before it could form. "Mr. Kwan?" she asked, her voice a low, smooth melody that cut through the restaurant's manufactured quiet. He rose, a gesture of pure, ingrained formality. He was taller than her, but it didn't feel like an advantage. "You must be Nia," he said. His tone was flat, a polished wall of indifference. "I am," she offered him a small, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was studying him, he realized, with the same intensity he was studying her. She took in the severe cut of his suit, the lethal stillness of his posture, the way his gaze swept the room's exits even as he looked at her. He pulled out her chair, and she settled into it with a soft murmur of thanks. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the expanse of white linen. The silence between them was different now. It was not empty. It was charged, a space where two entirely different worlds were colliding. "My grandfather speaks highly of your family," Jinwoo began, the words a pre-written script. "My mother is a formidable woman," Nia replied, her voice tinged with a dry amusement. "She believes in advantageous connections." She picked up her menu, her painted nails a dark counterpoint to the cream-colored card. "She also believes I don't get out enough." The honesty was disarming. He had expected pretense, flattery, perhaps a nervous giggle. He got none of it. He watched her scan the menu, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't performing for him. She was simply here. And he found himself inexplicably reluctant to deliver his 15-minute dismissal. "What do you do, Nia?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. He didn't care, not really.
It was just a way to fill the time.
I'm a curator, she said, looking up from the menu. At a small gallery downtown. We specialize in contemporary diasporic art. He nodded slowly.
Art.
Another world away from his. His world was made of concrete and blood, of debts and loyalty written in ink and steel. Hers was made of canvas and color, of ideas and beauty. The chasm between them was absolute. And you, Mr. Kwan? My mother was vague. She said you are in the import and export business. A corner of his mouth twitched. Of a sort. Her eyes held his, and for a fleeting second, he saw a flicker of understanding in their depths. She knew. Maybe not the specifics, not the name of his organization or the bodies that paved his path to power, but she knew he was not a simple businessman. She knew danger clung to him like the scent of his cologne, a subtle, sharp fragrance of cedar and smoke. And yet, she did not look away. That was the moment everything changed. Before the waiter could even approach their table, a sleek black sedan, its windows tinted to an impossible darkness, screeched around the corner outside. It didn't slow. It accelerated, its headlights two predatory eyes aimed directly at the restaurant's sprawling plate glass window. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. For Nia, it was a confusing blur of light and sound. For Jinwoo, it was a sequence of precise, calculated movements. He didn't think. He acted. In the space of a single heartbeat, he was out of his chair, his hand clamping around Nia's arm. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was steel, absolute and unyielding. Down. The word was a low growl, a command that bypassed her brain and went straight to her bones. He didn't just push her. He moved with her, his larger body becoming a shield. He swept the tablecloth, glasses, and silverware to the floor, pulling her down behind the heavy overturned table as the world outside erupted. The window imploded in a shower of crystalline shards, the sound a deafening roar followed by the staccato bark of gunfire. Screams echoed through the opulent dining room as patrons scrambled for cover. Nia's breath hitched in her throat, her mind struggling to catch up. One moment, she was on a strange, tense blind date. The next, she was crouched on a marble floor that was now glittering with broken glass, the smell of cordite sharp in the air. The most dangerous man she had ever met pressed against her back, his body a solid wall of heat and muscle. She could feel the steady, calm rhythm of his heart against her shoulder blades. He was not afraid. He was alive. The gunfire stopped as quickly as it had started. The black sedan peeled away, its tires screaming in protest. A different kind of silence fell, punctuated by whimpers and the distant wail of sirens. Jinwoo did not move for a long, tense moment. He remained a shield, his head up, his senses tracking every sound, every shadow. Then he shifted, his weight lifting off her. He looked down, his eyes scanning her for injury. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, devoid of emotion, but his eyes were dark with something she couldn't name. She shook her head, unable to form words. She was trembling, a fine tremor running through her limbs. He took her hand, his grip firm, and pulled her to her feet. His men, who had been ghosts in the periphery, a driver, a man at the bar, materialized around them, forming a tight, protective circle. They moved with the same silent, lethal efficiency as their boss. "We're leaving," Jinwoo said. It was not a suggestion. He guided her through the chaos, his hand a permanent fixture on the small of her back. They didn't go out the shattered front entrance. One of his men opened a door that led to the kitchens, and they moved through a maze of stainless steel and panicked staff, out into a narrow, dark alley. A different car, a matte black Audi, was waiting, its engine humming. He opened the back door and practically pushed her inside before sliding in beside her. The door closed with a heavy, solid thud, sealing them in. The car pulled away from the curb, melting into the soul night. Nia finally found her voice. "What was that?" Jinwoo stared out the window, his jaw tight, his reflection a stark, handsome mask in the glass. "A business disagreement. People died in there," she whispered, the reality of it crashing down on her. He turned his head slowly, his gaze pinning her to the plush leather seat.
No.
They were professionals. Their targets were me, and, by extension, you. The patrons were irrelevant. The coldness of his statement was more terrifying than the gunshots. She stared at him, at the man who moved through violence, as if it were his native language. The meticulously tailored suit, the polite conversation, the curated silence, it was all a facade, a thin veneer over the predator beneath. She should have been terrified of him. A part of her was. But another, more primal part of her, the part that had felt the steady beat of his heart against her back, recognized something else. In the middle of chaos, he had been her only point of certainty. "You can't just take me home," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "They saw me with you. They know my face." He didn't answer immediately. The car sped through the glittering city, a river of neon and concrete. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but absolute. "You are not going home." He looked at her, and the indifference was gone, replaced by a possessive, dangerous light. "You are coming with me. Until this is finished." It was not a choice. It was a declaration. Her ordinary life, with its canvases and gallery openings, had ended the moment she walked into that restaurant.
She was his problem now.
And in the dark, silent world of Kwon Jin-woo, problems were not solved. They were owned. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and chrome overlooking the Han River. It was vast, silent, and achingly empty, a monument to a man who valued control over comfort. For 3 days, it was Nia's gilded cage. Jinwoo gave her a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment, a closet filled with clothes in her size that had appeared as if by magic, and the unnerving attention of a silent housekeeper who seemed to anticipate her needs before she had them. What he did not give her was an escape. She saw him infrequently. He would be gone when she woke, a phantom who left behind only the faint scent of cedar and smoke in the hallway. He would return late at night, his face etched with a weariness that he concealed the moment he saw her. During those brief encounters, a strange ritual formed. He would find her in the main living area, where she sat sketching in a notebook she'd found, the city lights a sprawling galaxy below. He would pour himself a whiskey and stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her, and they would exist in a shared silence that was more intimate than any conversation. She learned about him in fragments. She saw the deference of his men, the way they spoke to him in low, respectful tones. She saw the brutal efficiency with which he ran his empire, his voice on the phone a cold, precise instrument issuing commands that she knew, with a sickening certainty, could end lives. And she saw the cracks in his perfect, cold armor. One evening, searching for a book in the sterile, unread library, her fingers brushed against the back of a loose drawer in his massive mahogany desk. It slid open silently. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of foreign currency and a spare, gleaming black pistol, was a small, silver picture frame. She picked it up. The photo was of a woman, her smile bright and unguarded, her dark hair long and straight. She was beautiful, with a delicate, almost fragile air. She was standing next to a much younger Jinwoo. He was smiling too, a genuine, unburdened smile that transformed his face, making him look like a different person entirely. Her name was Mian. Nia jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. Jinwoo was standing in the doorway, his suit jacket off, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and traced with the faint, silvery lines of old scars. His face was unreadable, but the temperature in the room had dropped by 20 degrees. She placed the frame carefully back on the desk.
"I'm sorry."
"I wasn't. She was my fiancée," he cut in, his voice flat, emotionless. He walked into the room, stopping on the other side of the desk. He didn't look at the photo. He looked at Nia. The Choi family, the ones who sent the welcome party to the restaurant, were a minor problem back then. I was careless. I thought I could have both lives. A normal one with her. And this, he gestured vaguely at the room, at the city, at the empire he commanded. They saw her as leverage. A weakness to be exploited. He paused, and the silence stretched, thick with unspoken pain. They used her to try and control me. When it didn't work, they killed her. It was a message. Nia felt a cold dread seep into her bones. This was his wound. This was the ghost that haunted the empty rooms of his penthouse, the reason for his absolute control. It wasn't just about power, it was about prevention. I learned a valuable lesson that day, he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Sentiment is a liability. Attachments are weapons that can be used against you. It will not happen again. The unspoken words hung between them. That is why you cannot stay here. That is why I cannot want you. The threat was no longer abstract. His lieutenant, a severe-looking man named Park, delivered the news the next day. The choice had identified her. They didn't have her name, but they had a description. The black woman with a powerful man. They were actively searching for her, putting out feelers in every corner of the city. She was no longer just a witness. She was a target. That evening, Jin Woo presented her with an envelope. Inside was a passport with her picture and a different name, a plane ticket to a city she'd never heard of, and a bank card with a staggering balance. My people will take you to a private airfield tonight, he said, his voice clipped, businesslike. You will have a new life. You will be safe. No one will find you. He was pushing her away, trying to protect her by erasing her. He was trying not to fail again. Nia looked at the documents, at the escape route he was offering. She could take it. She could run and never look back, forget the gunshots and the cold-eyed man who made her feel safer than anyone she had ever known. She could go back to being a person who thought danger was an overdrawn bank account or a bad review. She pushed the envelope back across the table.
No.
He stared at her, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. This is not a negotiation. It is for your own safety. You think they'll just stop looking for me? She challenged, her voice steady. Running makes me a target somewhere else, an easier one, without you. Here, she met his gaze, unflinching. At least I know who the enemy is. And so do you. It was a deliberate choice. A choice to stay in the heart of the storm, to stand with the man who was its center. She was not the fragile, delicate Mian. She would not be a liability. She would not be used against him. Later that night, a skirmish broke out at one of his warehouses. He returned with a deep gash on his forearm, bleeding through the sleeve of his shirt. He brushed it off as nothing, but Nia saw the way he favored it, the tight line of his jaw. While he was on the phone, his back to her, she found a first aid kit. When he finished his call, he turned to find her waiting with antiseptic and bandages. He started to protest, but she cut him off. Sit down, Jinwoo. She used his name for the first time, and it landed between them with a quiet weight. He hesitated, then did as she asked, sinking onto the edge of the leather sofa. She knelt before him, gently taking his arm. Her touch was surprisingly sure, her fingers cleaning the wound with a competence that belied her shaking hands. He watched her, his gaze intense, tracking the curve of her brow, the line of her jaw, the way she bit her lower lip in concentration. He wasn't looking at the wound. He was looking at her. The air grew thick, heavy. The only sounds were the crinkle of the bandage wrapper and their shared breathing. When she finished, her hands lingered on his arm. He slowly raised his other hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing against her full lower lip. It was a touch so gentle, so tentative, it felt like a confession. Her breath caught. His eyes were dark pools of conflict, of a longing he had sworn off, of a fear he would never admit. He leaned in, just a fraction, and then he stopped, pulling his hand back as if he'd been burned. The moment shattered. But the memory of it remained, a charged current that now flowed beneath every silence, every shared glance. He had tried to push her away, and she had refused to go. She had touched his wound, both the one on his arm and the deeper one he carried inside, and he had not flinched. The war for his soul was not over, but for the first time, he was no longer fighting it alone. The enemy escalated. A small, lacquered box was delivered to the gallery where Nia worked, addressed to her. His men intercepted it, of course, but the message was clear. They knew her world. They could touch it, burn it. Inside the box was a single, dead white orchid. The same flower Mi-yeon had loved. It was a declaration of intent, a cruel, personal strike aimed directly at Jin-woo's oldest wound. The attack, when it came, was brutally direct. They were in the car, moving through the rain-slicked streets of Itaewon, when two black sedans boxed them in. It was a professional ambush, fast and merciless. Jin-woo's driver swerved, the tires protesting, but there was nowhere to go. What happened next was a blur of choreographed violence. Jin-woo moved before the first gunshot echoed in the enclosed space. He shoved Nia down to the floor of the car, his body once again a living shield over hers. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low, lethal hum. She could hear the sickening thud of bullets hitting the armored car, the spider webbing of the reinforced glass. Jin-woo was on the phone, speaking in clipped, rapid Korean, his voice never rising, never betraying a hint of panic. He was a general commanding a battle from a trench. Through a small gap, Nia saw one of their attackers, a man in a black suit, trying to smash the driver's side window with the butt of his gun. Suddenly, the back door was ripped open. A man lunged in, and Jin-woo met him with a brutal efficiency that stole Nia's breath. It wasn't a brawl, it was a dissection. A precise strike to the throat, a twist of an arm that ended with a sickening crack. The man slumped backward out of the car. For a terrifying moment, Nia saw Jin-woo silhouetted against the flashing lights, exposed. She thought he was going to die. She forgot to breathe, her entire being focused on him, a silent, desperate plea. Another attacker, wounded and lying on the wet pavement, was fumbling for his phone. He was going to call for backup. The police. An arrival that would be a catastrophe for Jin-woo, trapping him between two enemies. Without thinking, Nia acted. Scrambling forward, she kicked out with her foot, her heel connecting with the man's hand. The phone flew from his grasp, skittering across the asphalt and disappearing down a storm drain. It was a small act, almost insignificant in the chaos. But it was a choice. She had crossed a line. She had picked a side, not as a victim, but as a participant. She had protected him. The wail of approaching sirens finally scattered their remaining attackers. Jin-woo's own backup arrived, a swarm of dark cars and silent, armed men who secured the scene with chilling speed. Jin-woo pulled her out of the car, his hands gripping her arms tightly, his eyes blazing as he searched her for any sign of injury. Back in the sterile safety of the penthouse, the adrenaline still thrumming through her veins, the silence was a living thing. He paced the length of the window, a caged predator, the city lights reflecting in his furious eyes. "You should have run when I gave you the chance," he finally bit out, his voice raw. Nia stood her ground, her fear eclipsed by a strange, fierce clarity. "And what? Let you deal with this alone? Let them use the memory of one woman to haunt you while they try to take another?" She took a step closer, her voice dropping, becoming more intense. "I am not her, Jin-woo. I am not Mi-yeon. I am not fragile, and I will not be your ghost." The words struck him like a physical blow. He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression shattering. The cold mask was gone, replaced by a maelstrom of emotions, fury, fear, and a raw, aching vulnerability. He closed the distance between them in two long strides, his hands coming up to cage her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I know," he breathed, and the admission was a surrender. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. It was not a declaration of love. It was something more dangerous, more real. It was an acknowledgement. "You are not her. You are different. You are here." He stared at her, his gaze dropping to her mouth. The confession had been made. The tension that had simmered between them for days finally boiled over. He lowered his head, and she met him halfway, her hands coming up to grip the front of his shirt. This was the claim, the deliberate crossing of a line from which neither of them could retreat. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claiming. It tasted of rain, of danger, and of a profound, undeniable truth. They were no longer two separate worlds. They were a collision, a new, volatile territory that belonged only to them. The final confrontation was inevitable. Jinwoo couldn't live with the choice constantly testing his defenses, using Nia as a phantom limb to torment him. He had to excise the rot, and he had to do it permanently. He planned it with the precision of a surgeon planning a delicate, life-or-death operation. And he planned to do it alone. "You will stay here," he told her the night he was to leave. He stood before her, dressed not in a suit but in dark, functional clothing that made him look even more dangerous. "The building will be on lockdown. No one gets in or out. You will be safe." He was building walls around her again, trying to put her back in the gilded cage. But she was no longer a prisoner. "You are going to get yourself killed," she said, her voice low and even. "I am ending a threat," he corrected, his jaw tight. "By walking into a trap? They are expecting you, Jinwoo. They sent the orchid. They ambushed the car. They are goading you into making a mistake." "It is not a mistake. It is a necessity," he reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. "When I get back, this will be over." He turned to leave, his mind already on the battle to come. But Nia was not the woman she had been a week ago. She was not passive. She would not wait to be rescued or widowed. While he had been planning his war, she had been listening. She had heard the name of a nightclub whispered on the phone, a place called Eclipse in a part of town Jinwoo's organization didn't control. She'd heard Park mention that the Choi family's patriarch had a weakness, a long-standing relationship with the club's owner, a woman he trusted implicitly. It was a detail Jinwoo, in his rage, had overlooked. He was planning for a frontal assault, a show of force. The Choi's were counting on it. He locked her in the penthouse, but he underestimated her. She didn't try to fight the guards. She went to the silent housekeeper, an older woman who had watched her with sad, knowing eyes for days. Nia didn't plead or threaten. She spoke to her, woman to woman, about the foolish pride of men who walk into fire, convinced they are fireproof. She didn't ask to be let out. She asked for a phone. A single, untraceable call. The final meeting was set for a desolate industrial pier. Jinwoo arrived with his men, expecting a bloody war. But the scene was strangely quiet. The Choi patriarch stood waiting, flanked by his soldiers, a smug look on his face. Just as the first tense words were exchanged, a fleet of police cars, sirens blazing, swarmed the pier, cutting off all exits. Both crews were caught, trapped. But the police didn't move on Jinwoo. They moved on the Choi's. They swarmed their cars, pulling out not just weapons, but kilos of narcotics from hidden compartments. The patriarch's face went from smug to ashen. He had been set up. Jinwoo stood in the chaos, uncomprehending, until he saw her. Nia was standing with a detective at the edge of the police cordon. She hadn't called his men. She had called the narcotics division. She had given them an anonymous tip about a major drug transport happening at the pier, providing the license plates of the Choi vehicles. And to make sure the tip was taken seriously, she had told them something only the club owner would know: the location of the hidden compartments in the cars. She hadn't fought his battle with guns. She had used intelligence. She had dismantled his enemy with a single phone call, ensuring the Choi's would be buried by the legitimate legal system, a prison from which their power could not save them. After the Choi's were taken away, after the chaos subsided, only Jinwoo and Nia remained on the pier, the flashing blue and red lights painting them in surreal colors. The cost of her victory was absolute. Her old life, her name, her gallery, it was all ash. To the world, she was now inextricably linked to him. He walked toward her, his expression stripped bare. The cold commander was gone. The strategist was gone. All that remained was the man. He stopped in front of her, the smell of the sea and the rain mixing with the lingering scent of cordite. He didn't thank her. He didn't tell her he loved her. He said something far more significant. "They saw you as a weakness," he said, his voice rough with emotion. A vulnerability they could exploit. He reached out, his hand cupping her jaw, his touch reverent. "They were wrong. You are the only part of this empire that is not for sale, not a liability." He looked into her eyes, and she saw his entire world there. "You are its foundation." It was a vow. It was a coronation. They returned to the penthouse. The city lights spread out before them, a kingdom of glass and steel. She was no longer a guest, no longer a prisoner. She could have walked out the door at that moment, and he would have let her go. He knew it, and she knew it. The choice was hers, and it had to be made in the quiet aftermath, not the heat of the battle. She watched the endless stream of headlights on the bridges below, a river of anonymous lives she no longer belonged to. Then she turned away from the window. She walked toward him, her steps sure and deliberate on the cool marble floor. He stood by the unlit fireplace, watching her, his heart in his eyes. She didn't stop until she was standing before him, her body almost touching his. She reached up and laid her palm flat against his chest, right over the steady, strong beat of his heart. She had felt it first in a moment of terror, and now she felt it in a moment of peace. It was the only home she had left. The choice was made, not with words, but with a silent, profound truth that would forever bind them to the city and to each other.